ॐ तत्सवितुर्वरं रूपं ज्योतिः परस्य धीमहि यन्नः सत्येन दीपयेत्। During the last satsang, we completed studying the 12th and 13th chapters of Yoga of Divine Works, and that brought us to the end of the section of Yoga of Divine Works of Karma Yoga. In one way, as much as through these satsangs we attempt to go through the chapters one by one with the intention that those who are unable to read page by page will be able to come across the main themes, go through the main themes as a part of the satsang, and thereby become familiar with all that Sri Aurobindo has written as a part of synthesis of yoga. That is the objective of these satsangs. In one way, as much as we try, the satsangs would probably never do a complete justice to a study of synthesis by an individual. We attempt to bring together the themes, we touch upon the main themes, but the depth of each of these subjects and the level at which Sri Aurobindo deals with them, it makes it probably impossible for anyone to do complete justice to the thought that is expressed there. Nevertheless, we try with a prayer and hope that it would still be of use to some of us who are unable to study the works of Sri Aurobindo, at least in one series from cover to cover, from beginning to end. With the same idea, we are taking up today's talk as a summary of the entire section of Karma Yoga. What I am attempting to do today is cover in the next 1 hour 10 minutes or 1 hour 15 minutes all the themes, all the major themes that Sri Aurobindo has touched upon in his work in Synthesis of Yoga in the Karma Yoga section. So it is somewhat of an ambitious attempt for the simple reason that it is a vast section. You may observe certain discontinuities in the satsang because we are moving from chapter to chapter at a relatively faster pace. So bear with me while we do that. In the first chapter called the Four Aids, what Sri Aurobindo has done has touched upon what he calls the four great instruments. He says, perfection that comes from the practice of yoga can be best attained by the combination of four great instruments. The four great instruments are Shastra, Utsaha, Guru, and Kala. The journey of a seeker is supported by these four pillars, either concurrently or successively. Shastra, the written word, a scripture, a book of mighty import such as probably the Bhagavad Gita, is one of the important supports for any spiritual seeker. In the integral yoga, however, Sri Aurobindo says, the supreme Shastra is the eternal Veda, secret in the heart of every being. By this what he means is the knowledge that we seek is already inside of us, waiting to be revealed, and each of us has to look inside for that knowledge. Nothing new from outside can be taught is one of the themes of integral education. And Shastra is the eternal way, the secret in the heart of every being. And he also says, when we refer to spiritual seeking through guidance from books, and we do have several scriptures, whether it is Granth Sahib for the Sikhs, Bible for the Christians, Gita and some others as the Upanishads for Hindus and so on. He says, for the sadhaka of the integral yoga, no written shastra, however great its authority or however large its spirit, can be more than a partial expression of the eternal knowledge. He underlines the fact that while each of these scriptures that we just mentioned is indeed a revelation of the truth, none of us can claim it to be an exclusive representation of the truth. Each of them, he says, is a partial expression, no more than a partial expression. And for the sadhaka of an integral yoga, all these are true, and yet truth transcends all these. That is what Sri Aurobindo says about the Shastra. Utsaha is the intensity of aspiration that each of us bring to the spiritual path. Our effort to practice patiently, persistently, along the lines that have been laid down for spiritual practice. The abhyasa part of our work. Sri Aurobindo says, the first determining element of the siddhi is the intensity of the turning, the force which directs our soul inwards. How passionately we turn towards the spiritual path or towards the inner seeking. He describes it in more detail and he says, the power of the aspiration of the heart, the force of the will, the concentration of the mind, the perseverance and determination of the applied energy in the measure of that intensity is the measure of that intensity. It's talking about how the utsaha, when it manifests and reflects in the mind, is the concentration of the mind. When utsaha reflected in the heart is the power of aspiration and the force of will through our life force. How seriously, how sincerely, with what strong will and exclusive pursuit we turn towards the spiritual path is often an important determinant along the path. Then of course the Guru, and the first and foremost Guru in the spiritual path, Sri Aurobindo reminds us, is the divine within. The first Guru is the one that is in the heart. You will recall how in Sri Aurobindo's spiritual journey during the Alipur seclusion, he had the revelation of Vasudeva as the central being of everything and everyone around him. Even in the worst criminal, he saw a manifestation of Vasudeva. He is the supreme teacher, is what Sri Aurobindo points out. And subsequently, he also adds that when we do seek out an external Guru, the Guru leads us along three paths or guides us in three ways. Through teaching, through explanation and elucidation of the Shastra, and when the Guru reveals to us the Shastra, it is no longer a inert word on a piece of paper, but that particular Shastra is enlivened through the experience of the Guru, and when he explains it, it comes out through his personal experience and therefore carries with it the power of realization in ourselves as well. So the teaching is one way that he guides us. The example, which is more powerful than the instruction. The Guru lives the truths that he expounds and preaches. Therefore, it leaves a stronger impression on us. And more importantly, the influence of the Guru. In other scriptures, this is compared to a wet log, a seeker as a wet log that is lying near the fire, who is the Guru who represents the truth, slowly the log becomes dry and is ready to rise as a flame in aspiration. The greatest master is much less a teacher than a presence pouring the divine consciousness into all who are around him. In fact, Mother has said that particularly in the early days of the ashram, when the seekers were much smaller in number and the intensity of pursuit was very, very strong, it is said how Mother carried each sadhak in her consciousness. That is the power of being near the Guru. So, Shastra, Utsaha, Guru and Kala. Kala is the time and the pursuit of spiritual practice that proceeds in the course of time. Kala can appear to us as a resistance when the focus is on the personal effort. Sometimes we get frustrated, we pursue a certain approach and we are yet to manifest the results of that approach. When the individual is the focus of the effort, then Kala appears as a resistance. When the divine working and the personal effort are combined in our consciousness, Kala appears as a medium. It is a medium through which we pass and the divine manifests through us. And once the two become one, once we become an instrument of the divine, Kala in turn becomes a servant. We don't have any eagerness, we don't have any feverishness. We just exist. I am. I manifest the truth. And time is one among the instruments that I use as I manifest the truth of the divine. So these are the four aspects that Sri Aurobindo begins the description of synthesis of yoga. Then he talks about self-consecration, how he says every energy or activity that we can convert from its allegiance to lower and dedicate to the service of the higher is so much gained on our road of spirituality. Our normal energies are dissipated in our day-to-day existence. They are focused on desire and its brother ego. And most of the time, our difficulties in spiritual path arise because a lot of our energies are focused on these two aspects. And the path of self-consecration needs us to direct these energies away from the ego to the divine. And as we offer more and more every energy or activity that we can convert from its allegiance to the lower and dedicate it to the service of the higher, so much is gained along the path. And as we offer ourselves consistently in our heart, in our will and in our mind, our own being through this self-consecration evolves, and what happens is we reach a state of consummated mind, consummated will and consummated heart. Means everything, our mind, will and heart are all consecrated to the divine. What happens when we consecrate them? When we consecrate our mind completely, we see constantly divine in itself, divine in ourselves, but also divine in all things and beings and happenings. As we pursue and imprint upon the mind the process of self-consecration, that impression gradually helps us see that everything around us is the divine, and all inside of us is also the divine, and everything that happens around us is also by the will of the divine. And then a consummated heart, when all emotion is summed up as the love of the divine, and a consummated will where we feel always and receive the divine impulsion and accept that alone as the sole motive force. As we go through this chapter on yoga, on kriya, on karma yoga, on yoga of divine works, repeatedly Sri Aurobindo points out how any single aspect of our effort at the end leads us to the realization of the fruits of karma yoga, jnana yoga and bhakti yoga, all inside of us. And that is how he is describing the result of self-consecration. He says, consummated mind, we see divine in everything, the result of Jnana Yoga. Consummated heart, when all emotion is summed up in the love of the divine, Bhakti Yoga. And consummated will, we feel and always receive the divine impulsion and accept that alone as the sole motive force. So all the three results are manifested inside of us. So that is self-consecration. Further, Sri Aurobindo elaborates on surrender. What is the way of self-surrender and the way of the Gita? In the ordinary human existence, an outgoing action is obviously 3/4 or even more of our life. A yoga of works, a union with the divine in our will and acts, is then an indispensable and inexpressibly important element of an integral yoga. Why is Karma Yoga important as a part of integral yoga? Because he points out that 3/4 or even more of our life is spent in outgoing action. And unless that outgoing action is cultured by a mind and heart and will, a life force that are devoted to the divine, all that energy is wasted. And if that energy is not harnessed to our spiritual growth, we are not making progress, because that is 3/4 of our life. A total consecration and surrender and the resultant entire transformation and free transmission make up the whole and fundamental means and the ultimate aim of an integral yoga. Dynamic surrender to the divine guide is the central secret. This surrender is indispensable means of the supramental change. We will see this theme again. Sri Aurobindo emphasizes here dynamic surrender. Surrender while we are in action. Surrender while we are working. Because the first step that happens in spiritual life is we go inside, we remain static, and we realize a certain state in our consciousness. However, that state remains at the fringe of our consciousness, but it does not reflect in the dynamic nature of our work. Madhav Panditji used to say, the highest results of your meditation have to manifest in your day-to-day work. It will not do to attain absolute peace and tranquility in your meditation, and then when we have a problem at work, we react from a surface level of consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo says here that the dynamic surrender to the divine is the central secret. This surrender is indispensable means of the supramental change. And one of the things that happens when we start doing this surrender, when we start enforcing this surrender on ourselves, is that action suddenly turns as an offering to the divine. Action today is tied up to desire and ego, the two knots, Sri Aurobindo calls them. But through surrender, what happens is we gradually get out of this. Very rarely do we see Sri Aurobindo talking about do's and don'ts in integral yoga. But in this particular chapter, he does give us 2 or 3 do's and don'ts. He says first, what are the objectives of integral yoga? To live in God and not in ego. As we discussed just now, most of our activity and our thought process and our outgoing action and our internal analysis is all surrounded by desire and ego. And he says, remove ego as the king of the throne and instead put God as the king of the throne. Second thing, to be perfectly equal in all happenings and to all beings and feel them as one with oneself and the divine. Try and realize that everything in and around us is a manifestation of the divine, and develop an element of tranquility and equanimity. We will revisit this topic in a little bit again. And third is to act in God and not in ego, not to choose action by reference to personal needs or desires, but act in God, act without desire, act without reference to ego, act as a part of our dharma and our duty. These are some of the do's and don'ts of Karma Yoga and surrender, and how the surrender would progress in Karma Yoga. We have to learn to bear the shocks of the world with the central part of our being untouched and silent. As we go through life, it is not a bed of roses, we all know that. Unexpected incidents happen. Equanimity would mean bearing the shocks of the world with the central part of our being untouched and silent. This is only possible when we move away from living in the surface consciousness to a deeper consciousness. How can we do that on a continuous basis? We have to seek out time for meditation and use meditation as an opportunity to shut down the external indriyas, the outside machine, and give some time to ourselves to go deeper in our consciousness. And from that consciousness we come out and act. And then we will be in a position where we will be untouched and silent even when things don't go right outside. Equality, renunciation of desire for fruit of the works, action done as a sacrifice to the Supreme Lord are the three first Godward approaches of Karma Yoga. Equality, renunciation of the desire for fruit of the works, and action done as a sacrifice to the Supreme Lord. These are the three first Godward approaches in Karma Yoga. And these are the ones that are outlined in Gita as well. Right? Try to become a sthita prajna is one of the things. Karmanyevadikarasya, offer the fruits, don't have control on the fruits, don't try to seek after the fruits. These are some of the things that he does. And Sri Krishna describes how each person is a part of the universal action, and how he himself, even though has no need to act, still acts because that is the dharma. These are the three things that Sri Aurobindo is summarizing at the end of this chapter. Now we come to a section of Yoga of Divine Works. This section comprises of almost half the volume of Yoga of Works, and also this section is regarded as a section which contains some of the central truths expounded by Sri Aurobindo. These are themes that are not touched upon in the existing scriptures, and they have been revealed by Sri Aurobindo and are also key to the sadhana of integral yoga. These chapters are referred to as, the first chapter is sacrifice, and the subsequent two chapters are the ascent of the sacrifice. The law of sacrifice is the common divine action that was thrown into the world in its beginning as a symbol of the solidarity of the universe. So what is this law of sacrifice? Each existence is continually giving out, perforce from its stock, out of its mental receipts from nature, or its vital and physical assets and acquisitions and belongings. A stream goes out to all that is around it. What he is pointing out is no existence, not only human, no existence in this universe is isolated from the rest of the universe. Each existence is continually giving out from its stock, and a stream goes to all that is around it. Our physical, our mental, and our energy level. All these three aspects of our existence are continuously giving and receiving. They are in a process of interchange with the universe. At a physical level, it is easy to understand. We eat food that comes from nature. We breathe air. We don't manufacture it somewhere. Without water, we would not exist. We are dependent at the physical level on the universe. That is very easy to understand or appreciate. Similarly, Sri Aurobindo says that at the mental level, we are connected to the universal mind. Our thoughts are not our own, but come to us from the universal mind depending on our propensities. Similarly, there are ways to tap into the universal life force, the universal prana, and consciously or unconsciously that anyway happens right now. The sacrifice and the divine return for our sacrifice become a gladly accepted means towards our last perfection. This sacrifice, Sri Aurobindo says, is the means towards our perfection, but not in its current form. Why? Most often, this sacrifice is done unconsciously, egoistically. When so done, the individual derives only a mechanical minimum of the inevitable profit. Currently, when we give out with a reference to our ego. I bequeath my property to my son. I give something to my sister. I offer something to my parents. We are bound by the ego and our offering. Even though Sri Aurobindo says, whatever you give to whomever you give, at the end of the day you are giving to the divine, our reference point is the ego, and therefore we are not in a position to derive the maximum benefit. When we remove the desire and ego and we realize that wherever I am placed in my status in life, I should continuously look for opportunities to give and receive without ego. That day, whatever I do, I become a part of the universal existence, and the sacrifice becomes true sacrifice. Only when the heart, the will, and the mind of knowledge associated themselves with the sacrifice as a law and gladly follow it, can there come the deep joy, the happy fruitfulness of the divine sacrifice. This is the state of consciousness of a siddha. This is the state of consciousness of a yogi. He does not differentiate between mine and somebody else's. He continuously radiates love. He continuously gives whatever he can give to all his children. Anyone who comes to his feet is his child. There is no preference, there is no prejudice. That is the state of consciousness where we have to gradually realize that whichever station in life we have been asked to occupy, we occupy it. We live there and work there with dharma as the guiding principle, and whatever we need to do, whatever we need to give, we give it with a certain equanimity without reference to ego. Then we become a part of the universal existence. We become a channel of the universal energy. We become what Sri Aurobindo refers to in some of these chapters as a center for divine action, because our ego is no longer clouding it. The true essence of the sacrifice is not self-immolation, it is self-giving. Its object not self-effacement, but self-fulfillment. We should turn our whole life into a conscious sacrifice. All our actions must be performed as consecrated acts. He is obliquely referring here to the sacrifice that is commonly perceived by a lot of us. When we look back, we take up some animal, we sacrifice it. We take up something else, we sacrifice it, he says. Or even we do asurik tapasya. Even that is not acceptable as a path in spiritual life. He says, the true essence of sacrifice is not self-immolation. Don't subject yourself to pain to realize God. It is self-giving. Consecrate all your acts as an offering to God. So what happens when we do this sacrifice? What happens when we move away from ego and say, okay, I am thankful to God for giving me a comfortable life. I am thankful to God for giving me a comfortable existence. I will do whatever my duty is in my position without attachment, preference or prejudice. If I do that, if my ego and desire do not cloud my act, then what happens? What is the result of this sacrifice? Sri Aurobindo says, Even if such a discipline is begun without devotion, it leads straight and inevitably towards the highest devotion possible. Because gradually we realize, I am not giving it to this person or that person, I am giving it to the universal Purusha, and he is nothing but, he is wearing a mask and in front of me, so I am offering this to him, I am offering this to him. Gradually there is a realization of his existence all around us, and a deep emotion of love and surrender that comes out. So it leads towards the highest devotion possible. This way of works turns by communion with the divine presence, will and force into a way of knowledge more complete and integral than any. So first we saw it gives us the crown achievement of yoga of devotion. And then we realize the fruit of Jnana Yoga, which is he is the one who is receiving everything from me. He is everywhere. Whatever happens around me is his will. And what happens is, it gives us the results of Jnana Yoga. This way of works turns by communion with the divine presence, will and force into a way of knowledge. We get the results of Jnana Yoga. And lastly, the practice of this yoga of sacrifice compels us to renounce all the inner supports of egoism, casting them out of our mind and will and action. It removes the layers and layers of ego that are there, because we are gradually moving our reference away from our inner point of desire and ego to him, and gradually the layers and layers of ego are removed, which is one of the biggest difficulties and stumbling blocks for all the seekers in the path of yoga. We will come back to the concept of ego again and again as we go through these sections. Subsequently, we also have three fundamental realizations. I see perhaps or feel in myself or as myself first the eternal presence. I may feel in myself or as myself the eternal presence. This is one of the realizations that comes through conscious sacrifice. The second, I may see the divinity first in the world around me, not in myself but in others. So there are different ways of arriving at the universal consciousness. I may feel the eternal as an individual in myself. I may feel the eternal first as a presence around me everywhere, which is the universalization. It is the awakening to an ineffable, high, transcendent, unknowable, above myself and above this world in which I seem to move. As I realize that he is there in me, around me, I also realize that he could be there above me. So you have the realization of the individual Supreme Purusha, the universal Supreme Purusha, and the transcendental Supreme Purusha. All of these are the realizations that the path of the sacrifice leads me to. Sri Aurobindo also brings in another theme of thought as we progress to this path of sacrifice. He says, as we try to get away from ego, as we try to get away from desire, we come across three sets of dualities in the path. Three sets of dualities. A duality is nothing but two parameters, probably apparently contradictory at times, that are paired together. The first is something all of us are familiar with. Brahman and Maya, God and illusion. Right? As we struggle through this world, one of the spiritual thoughts that has existed in India is Mayavadin. This entire world, Jagat Mithya, the entire world is illusion. God is above and beyond this world. Sri Aurobindo says the seeker may arrive at that level of consciousness where he may struggle with it for some time, but later he realizes that there is a supreme truth behind this duality. What is the supreme truth? As we make conscious sacrifice as the means of our spiritual progress, Brahman Maya stands revealed as the first great dynamic aspect of the Lord of the world, world sacrifice and his sacrifice. We realize initially, even though they appear contradictory, they stand revealed to us as two sides of the same coin. It is he who is manifesting around us, even though he may not be his perfect self. Elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo says, God may wear a grotesque mask in this world if it so suits his purpose. We realize that the deformed presence in front of us also is not Maya, but it is just another aspect of the Brahman. Further, Purusha and Prakriti, this is the second duality that he is referring to. These two states may alternate or stand simultaneously against each other. Eventually, in this witness soul or behind it is revealed to him the presence of the knower and master will in nature. The thought of Purusha and Prakriti is that our individual consciousness currently is in a unipolar existence. We just live as our being and we only see our body, and our consciousness is impinging upon the universe and receiving its shocks. As we go deeper into this duality of Purusha and Prakriti, through continual offering of the sacrifice, by repeatedly telling ourselves that no, ego is not my final station, the divine is my final station, I gradually come into a witness consciousness. I don't get carried away by Prakriti. I don't get carried away by my emotions. I don't get carried away by my desires. I stand back and I see the play of the desire. I see the play of the ego. And I say, no, let that be where it is. That is the realm of ignorance. I stand beyond it. I arrive at a station of consciousness where I become the Purusha. And Sri Aurobindo says, this separative aspect is liberative. It suddenly opens up new panorama of consciousness for us. So this is the second duality of Purusha and Prakriti. Even though we are entangled in the Prakriti initially, gradually through the sacrifice, we separate the Purusha from the Prakriti, and that is a big liberative aspect in our consciousness. We are no longer narrow, we are no longer suffering, we are apart from all that, we observe those movements. The third one, which is one step higher than this, is Ishvara Shakti. On one side, he is aware of an infinite and self-existent Godhead in being who contains all things. On the other side, he becomes aware of the same Godhead put forth as a self-aware force that is charged to manifest it in universal time and space. He realizes God, he perceives God as somebody who contains this whole universe in himself. And he also perceives God as the electric current, as the energy that pervades this universe, that makes this whole thing possible. Ishvara, somebody who stands aside and who observes and contains all of this universe. And the Shakti, which is the static principle, and Shakti, the dynamic principle. It is when the complete union of the two sides of the duality is effected and rules his consciousness that he begins to open to a fuller power that will draw him into a higher truth and enable the descent of that truth. So, initially, the Ishvara may reveal himself in our meditative and static voices, we may perceive him, but as we live the sacrifice in our day-to-day existence, we perceive that we are no longer offering the sacrifice. It is the Supreme Shakti that is using me as an instrument and offering the sacrifice. This also is the Lord. And that is where Sri Aurobindo says that it is when complete union of the two sides of dualities is effected and rules his consciousness that he begins to open to a fuller power that will draw him into the higher truth and enable the descent of that truth. So we become the channel and the truth descends through us. So these are the three polarities, three dualities that he talks about as culminating and their results manifesting in us as we work and practice the law of sacrifice consciously, without ego being the reference, but with divine being the reference. Next, we come to two themes as a part of the ascent of the sacrifice. These are two themes which again are very central to integral yoga. The first theme is what Sri Aurobindo reveals to us as the ranges of the mind. Sometimes when we read Sri Aurobindo, we feel he is a spiritual scientist, because he has not just explained patterns that emerge, he has not just explained things that happen, but he has analyzed why and how they happen and how to make them happen. For example, when we read Puranas, when we read scriptures, there are anecdotes where you come across rishis, sages and seers, who have the power of Trikala Jnana, the past, the knowledge of the past, present and future. We have rishis who have intuition, they close their eyes and they tell you what happens. We have rishis who have illumination, they close their eyes, they can see the truth and they can reveal the truth. We have all come across this, but we never thought, what is the separation between my state of mind and the state of mind of that rishi? Is it possible for me to get there? Or do I just perform austerities and someday as a result of my austerities, a God appears and gives me a boon? Is that the only way that it can happen? These are things we probably never consciously thought about, because the gulf was so wide, we never bothered to ask that question, can I ever get there? Because we feel so distant and separative from them. What Sri Aurobindo has done in Synthesis of Yoga and Life Divine is, while saying mind is not the last summit, he has told us what are the higher peaks that exist. The range of illumined mind, the range of intuitive mind, the peak of overmind and beyond that supermind. And how to move from the mind and what are the steps one by one from here to there. So this is a knowledge that is given to us because, again, human beings today are the only forms of existence that can make conscious progress. They can achieve higher levels of consciousness. They have the capability of self-correction. And this self-correction, when applied consciously, is nothing but yoga. And we have the unique capability of expediting our evolution. No other species has it. So how do we expedite our evolution? Here is what Sri Aurobindo reveals. First, of course, in this particular section, he talks about the mind and how chaotic it is. We don't think when we want to think. Mind thinks, mind has thoughts that go on and on and on and on restlessly. The restless activity of the mind gives no room for the descent of the true illuminating knowledge, and it is impossible for the intuition to develop. Using the mind, today we exist, and the best and the worst part of human existence in the world today, whether you see countries that are engulfed in fire and they are going up in smoke, thousands of people suffering and dying every day needlessly, or a peaceful, tranquil existence in some corners of the world, both of these are a reflection of the capabilities of the mind. The chaos we see outside is the chaos of the mind of the man. And in that chaos we operate, feeling proud that somehow we are the head of the world, we are the most capable species in the world. Sri Aurobindo says, as long as the mind is restless and dominated by ego and desire, you cannot really achieve the heights of individual existence. So where do we go from our current chaotic existence of mind? In fact, one example of mind today is a wonderful car which can go at 140 miles per hour but without a steering wheel. And that is how most of us lead our lives. So Sri Aurobindo says, first, the restless activity has to stop. In Letters on Yoga, he says, bring silence into the mind. That is the first step. So what is the range that we arrive at beyond the mind? The first range is a higher mind. A mind no longer of mingled light and obscurity, but of large clarity of spirit. This is a mind where we get there by establishing a certain silence. And what are the characteristics of the higher mind? The characteristics are that it has clarity of spirit, totality of truth seeing in a single view. One way to look at it is this higher mind does not operate through analysis and deduction, which are the two approaches of mind that we use, but it is a mind of synthesis. It is a mind that brings everything together. Madhav Panditji says, if normal chaotic mind is like seeing a few things when we walk in a desolate, unfamiliar terrain, when you are going to an unfamiliar path, and you are seeing a few rocks and a few trees, you can't see the whole way. If that is the normal mind, higher mind is like daylight that brings everything clearly into its view. Higher mind goes with synthesis, with integrality. It is not analysis and deduction. That is the next step from where we are. Beyond that is illumined mind. Illumined mind does not work primarily by thought, but by vision. It is revealed to us. The truth is revealed to us. It is like a play of lightnings of spiritual truth and power that breaks from above into the consciousness. You want to know something, it is revealed as an illumination, as a vision. And along with the vision is a vast descent of peace. Contrast it with what our current approach is. When we have a severe problem, we have restless activity around the problem associated with a certain nervousness of what the result of that situation is going to be. Contrast it with an illumined mind where it does not work by thought but by vision, and each of such play of lightnings is accompanied by a descent of peace. A downpour of inwardly visible light very usually envelops this action. I have taken another line from Madhav Panditji here. He says, true inner light becomes visible when illumined mind begins to operate. It also carries a great force of execution. In our current state of mind, we are at the mercy of the circumstances. This is the problem. These are the 5 people who may be influencing the problem in a positive or negative way. What are the possible ways in which they may influence it? What are the ways in which I can counteract? And oh God, I don't know what will be the outcome. This is the normal operation of the mind. The operation of illumined mind is, I submit the problem to the divine, I pray for guidance, and the result when I achieve a state of illumined mind is the course of action is revealed to me with peace, at the same time a clear direction. Next, we go to the range of intuitive mind. It is when the consciousness of the subject meets the consciousness of the object, penetrates it, and sees, feels or vibrates with the truth of what it contacts. Intuition leaps out like a spark or lightning flash. There is a beginning of a sense of identity. There is a beginning of a sense of universality. We don't look at a problem as if good happens, I benefit, if bad happens, I lose. I don't have that dichotomy anymore. I look at it as a universal action and try to arrive intuitively as what would be the ideal solution, Loka Kalyana. What would be the resolution of a situation that can yield and result in happiness and fulfillment to everybody? And accompanied by the intuitive mind, there are 4 attributes: truth hearing, truth seeing, truth of touch, and truth of discrimination. When intuition manifests in me, what happens through me is along the lines of truth. There is a simple example. You want to give somebody 5 rupees, you put your hand in a tray of coins, you lift up, 5 rupees comes. Truth of touch. Truth is just manifesting through you. There are other examples that are there in the course of the ashram, but I will not digress in the interest of time. How people who have manifested intuitive mind or parts of intuitive mind through them, how they operate is truly amazing. They can see the truth, they can hear the truth. Truth manifests through the touch. And when a course of action has to happen, you don't have to struggle with analysis and deduction. It reveals itself, true discrimination. This is the working of the intuitive mind. Next we come to overmind, which Sri Aurobindo describes as, it is a power of cosmic consciousness, a principle of global knowledge which carries in it a delegated light from the supramental gnosis. Ego sense is entirely subordinated. Not only are you conscious that you are contained in the cosmos, but also the cosmos is felt within you. It's a very beautiful state of experience. We can only speculate it. We can only try to arrive at it through the mind. That is the limitation that we have today. But it is a state of cosmic consciousness. I, when I refer to I, no longer refers to my body and mind. Here, there is no I. It is only we, or the entire universe that exists. And through higher levels of manifestation, it is the universe is contained in me. The instrumental individuality may entirely disappear. A drop of water no longer perceiving itself as a drop of water perceiving itself as an ocean, or a drop of water which says, I am the ocean and the drop is just inside me, and so is the rest of the world inside of me. Overmind is the highest rung of the lower hemisphere. In traditional imagery of Indian scriptures, the world is described as 2 hemispheres, the lower hemisphere and the upper hemisphere. And Sri Aurobindo points out that the highest level of existence of the lower hemisphere is the universal, is the overmind. And supermind, which stands above it, is the power to organize the works of truth, which is no longer tarnished by the shadow of cosmic inconscience and ignorance. Right up to the level of the overmind, there is some reach of the inconscience and ignorance. What is this shadow of inconscience and ignorance? In our own sadhana, in our own spiritual pursuit, sometimes we reach higher states of consciousness. We reach pinnacles of consciousness where we experience silence, where we experience bliss. But 3 days later, we go back to work and we are consumed and enveloped by the normal level of consciousness. That is nothing but the shadow of ignorance. Why could we not remain at that highest level which we achieved during a meditation in some place? That is the nature of mind and our spiritual progress. And Sri Aurobindo says that does not happen once we arrive at the supermind. The change is irrevocable from here. Once you arrive there, there is no falling down. Right now we go up, we fall down. We go up, we fall down. It is not as bad as falling down. It is a spiral that is going upwards. Each time it feels like we have fallen down, but we have made one little step ahead. But once we reach the supermind, the change is irrevocable, he says. In action, there is always an identity of contact. There does not have to be an I and that, me and that. There is no separation. It is at the end of the day, as I struggle to explain this to you, there is a somewhat of a soothing sentence from Sri Aurobindo. He says, it is hard for our mental consciousness to speculate how Gnostic consciousness would function. In fact, even when you read various writings in this, he does not get into a detailed explanation of the supramental. He says whatever we do is a conjecture. It is an imagination. We can try and do it, we may be right or wrong. So these are the ranges of the mind that Sri Aurobindo has revealed in Yoga of Divine Works, in the Karma Yoga section of Synthesis of Yoga. Next, he brings out one more important section, one more revelation of Sri Aurobindo for the rest of the world, and this is what he refers to as the psychic being. And this also is elaborated upon in this chapter on the ascent of the sacrifice. A mystic light behind the heart center, Hridaye Guhyam, a spark of the divine that supports this obscure mass of nature. In grosser terms, we can refer to this as Antaratma. However, what Sri Aurobindo has done is, again, we have seen the imagery of the lamp within in traditional literature as well. The reason I say Sri Aurobindo has revealed this is because he did not just say, well, all of you have a little lamp inside of you, Angushtamatra inside of your heart. He has laid down the methods, the principles through which we can arrive at our consciousness of that lamp inside of us. He has said what are its characteristics, what are its properties, how do you reach there and how do you bring it out. These are things that you again don't find anywhere else. These are things that he has laid down. Sri Aurobindo and Mother have written and exhaustively answered questions and answers tirelessly when so many aspects of psychic being were put in front of them. How do you arrive? How do you become aware? At a certain stage in yoga, when mind is sufficiently quietened, when vital, the pranamaya purusha, has been steadied and subdued, and when the physical has been sufficiently altered by elimination of inertia and all that, at that time, an inmost being is able to come forward and illuminate the rest and take up the lead of the sadhana. For some of us, it is almost tantamount to Sri Aurobindo saying, well, do all the yogas that have so far been described and then you will arrive at the psychic being. Because to quieten the mind, to subdue the vital, and to alter the physical are themselves objectives of other parts of yoga. Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga try to bring in something into the physical and the vital. Right? Jnana Yoga is about trying to quieten the mind and remove all of that. And once that is accomplished, the psychic being comes forward. However, at the same time, it is not that discouraging. There are ways to pursue this also. It is the very nature of the psychic being to turn towards the divine truth as the sunflower to the sun. It is only when the life turns towards the divine that the soul can truly come forward and impose its power on the outer members. For itself a spark of the divine, to grow into a flame towards the divine is its true life and its very reason for its existence. In fact, Sri Aurobindo does not just say, well, there is a psychic being. He says there is a gradual evolution into psychic being. He says initially there is psychic influence. Psychic influence that evolves into a psychic entity and then emerges into a psychic being. What is psychic influence? The pang of conscience that we feel when we are trying to do something that is aligned to falsehood and not towards the truth in our day-to-day life, that is psychic influence. If we listen to that pang of truth that says, you are not supposed to do this. This is not the path of truth. This is not the path of righteousness. Instead of pushing that suggestion under the carpet, if we listen to that and let that prompting of truth guide our life, slowly the psychic being comes forward. It is God's whisper, is another way of putting it poetically. Purity is one of the important things for the psychic being to come forward. The psychic fire fails in the strangling of the vital smoke. Look at the imagery. If you let the vital and the desire and the ego dominate you, you can never listen to the whisper of God. We have to set aside the vital ambition, pride, power, etc. And other ways to bring it forward: aspiration, constant and sincere. The will to turn to the divine alone are the best means to bring forward the psychic. So not only Sri Aurobindo is saying there is a psychic being inside, he is telling us how to bring it forward. Have very strong aspiration. Gradually the psychic will come forward. Once Madhav Panditji asked his guide Kapali Shastriyar, who is also a devotee of Sri Aurobindo and mother and spent several decades in the ashram, he noticed a reddish patch on the chest and he said, "What is it?" And he says, Kapali Shastriyarji said, it could have been a result of the intense aspiration that he has had in the previous days. So our efforts to aspire and bring forward the psychic are not some theoretical expositions. They can be very practical and very sincere, very, very physical in their manifestations. So when there is an awakening of the psychic being, there are 4 signs. What are the 4 signs of the awakening of the psychic being? You no longer commit the mistake of identifying yourself with the vital and the mental. When you feel like doing something, you just don't go do it. You refer to the central truth. That is the first sign. The psychic being gives true bhakti for God. You come to the feet of your Guru, you come to the feet of the Divine, and bhakti, a wave of love, emerges from your heart. Third, a very different description. You can experience psychic sadness. When do you experience psychic sadness? You experience psychic sadness when you let your vital do tandava in your being. When you let every desire fulfilled. At that time, the psychic sadness, it sees through the games of the mental and the vital, and it brings up the real questions in the middle of this entire circus. Why am I here? What am I doing? What is the meaning of my life? And there is a certain tinge of sadness associated with that. And usually when we are sincere, that sadness wakes us up from our dream and again points us out the purpose of our life. The fourth, psychic being refuses to be deceived by appearances. It has an automatic perception of the truth and untruth, and it feels the force of the truth with it. These are the 4 signs of an evolving and an awakening psychic being. And in this chapter, in this section, Sri Aurobindo has outlined how to bring forth the psychic being, listen to its guidance. Subsequently, in the other chapters, Sri Aurobindo talks about the standards of conduct and spiritual freedom. He says, ethical and moral compulsions defining the standard of conduct of an individual are not valid. They are very limited in their scope, and even when achieved, they may not achieve the highest capability of a human being, highest potentiality of a human being. All ethical and moral boundaries are okay for an average person, but they are not sufficient for a spiritual seeker. For a spiritual seeker, all conduct and action are a part of the movement of a power, of a force infinite. This power leading towards the light, but still through ignorance. It transforms the needs and desires into the divine will and ananda. And he says, your guidance, your action cannot be guided by a moral principle or an ethical principle or a social principle. The supramental action will proceed by a spontaneous outflowing from the summits of the totality of an illumined and uplifted being, will and knowledge. The highest ranges of our consciousness have to guide our action, not any man-made rule or law. As we do that, there is a section where Sri Aurobindo talks about how does the sadhaka understand what is the action that he has to do, what is the supreme will that he has to execute. First of all, he asks, how do you become aware of the supreme will while most of us are still entangled in desire and ego? And he says, the separation of the Purusha from the Prakriti will enable us to move away from ego to the highest self. Again, we come back to the theme of Purusha and Prakriti. It keeps repeating itself again and again through various aspects. And he says the supreme will can be revealed to you if you are in a position to separate your Purusha consciousness. And once that happens, he becomes aware of that highest and dynamic self within him, the source of the sanction, the source of the acceptance, the source of the rejection. This is the Lord, the Supreme, the one in all, of whom his soul is a portion. He realizes the truth of Ishvara Shakti. Then Sri Aurobindo subsequently emphasizes the necessity of equality, right? Samatha, annihilation of ego, moving away from ego. And he spends an entire chapter on a theme that is familiar to us, the three modes of nature, Rajoguna, Tamoguna and Sattvaguna. And he elaborates how you have these three gunas manifest through our three sheets, the physical, vital and the mental. And he also talks about Sattvic ego, which is a contradiction in terms. Sattvic ego is when we find the path of the truth, we say mine is the only path of the truth. Right? So he cautions us against it. And he says, Tamas, Rajas and Sattva have a role in the overall universe. They have to be transformed. How they have to be transformed? Tamas has to be transformed to provide tranquility. Tranquility is a state of no action. It has to be transformed into immutable stability, sthiratva. Rajas has to be transformed into self-possessed force and illimitable action of the force. Chit Shakti, conscious force. The feverish pursuit of action, which is Rajoguna, has to be transformed into controlled, dynamic, forceful action as Chit Shakti. And then Sattva becomes equilibrium, undisturbed peace, and quiet certainty of truth and knowledge. And he says, after this transformation, the sadhaka of the integral yoga has to evolve beyond the three of them and become Nistraigunya. And subsequently, Sri Aurobindo talks about how as we move away from the current indulgence in ego with desire and ego as the primary drivers, we move away into the higher state of consciousness. We begin to understand what is the work and subsequently identify ourselves with the master of the work. The divine reveals to us at the individual level, at the universal level and again at the transcendental level. Tattvamasi. I have manifested those truths in me. Aham Brahmasmi. I have manifested those truths in me. And I become Him. And that is the culmination of Karma Yoga. That is what he points out. This force that we feel is the universal force of the divine. He becomes one energy that alone exists and alone makes universal or individual action possible. And then, still higher, he moves into the transcendental state of consciousness, an ascent out of this cosmic identity into the identity of the divine transcendence, where the individual perceives the world itself as an emanation. The world is a part of me. The world emanates from me. And there is a height when the individual, the universal and the transcendence, all the three live eternally in each other. In fact, we have had the privilege of personal example of this through the mother. In the book, the mother, Sri Aurobindo writes about how the mother exists in all the three voices of the individual, universal and transcendence. Madhav Panditji wrote elaborately how at one moment the mother would be looking into your eyes with all the love and affection, and you would feel so close to her at an individual level, and at the next moment how she would be in her faraway transcendences as the universal Shakti. So these were the states of consciousness which some of our sadhaks were privileged to experience, and that is the culmination of the yoga of works as described by Sri Aurobindo. And subsequently Sri Aurobindo ends this section of yoga of works as once you reach this highest level of consciousness and you have manifested all of that, the soul still has two possibilities left in him. He says it could be liberated and merge itself and lose its identity into the transcendental supreme, or it could continue to exist in the terrestrial realm and work as an instrument of the divine, as a perfect and true instrument of the divine. Regarding the second part, Sri Aurobindo says, in the way of the works, another prospect opens. For traveling on the path, we can enter into liberation and perfection by becoming one law and power of the nature with the eternal. We are identified with Him in our will and dynamic self as much as in your spiritual status. A divine way of works is the natural outcome of this union. So, we continue to do works, but from a state of consciousness which is completely identified with the Supreme. So, these are the major themes that are there covered as a part of the yoga of works. I have only skimmed upon maybe about 40-50% of the main themes that have been covered, but I thought, having spent the last 4 to 5 months going chapter by chapter, we would use this session to bring together all the major themes in yoga of works today. So we end this session with a brief meditation as always.